I know.
And we're back.
And we hopefully are back here. Check it out. See if we're there. We are. We're back. See, that was welcome to technology.
Yeah.
It suddenly crashes. So
Real
um,
life and the
I know
live
real
world.
life in the live digital world.
I
Um,
know most of you guys, if you're a ministry leader or a church leader and you're watching, this has probably been the reality of the last couple of weeks. I've so many people I've talked with, they're like, oh, we're gonna do there's a young adult ministry here in Fargo. It's fairly large. They maybe 200-300 young adults, and their first 2 weeks trying to do their live stream on Thursday night for their thing, they couldn't get it going.
yep.
2 weeks in a row. It's a
So we're
bummer.
trying this again. We hey, so here's what we're doing. If you're jumping on back on with us, welcome back. If you're for the first time, Ben and I we're going to do just a live video here, just looking at building the foundation of your ministry. And in fact, we're gonna do a Q&A at the end. If there's any questions you have, you can put those in the comments below, and we can hit those at the end. But just as a kind of a snapshot of this is in a lot of ways, as we look at the opportunity to build into our ministries right now, as a ministry leader who's leading a college or young adult ministry, and you have an opportunity to be leading the ministry. What does it look like for you to leverage this time in order to strengthen the foundation of your ministry? Because that's what we're seeing a lot right now, is that there's an opportunity really to kind of leverage into just in this time to not just work in the ministry, but actually to work on your ministry. So how are we going to do that? So want to welcome you. If you have a question or comment, Peggy Choate, see that. Love you. Thanks for jumping on with us. If anybody wants to comment or leave a question, we are going to do a Q&A at the end of this call. So Ben, let's go back to kind of the question before the live dropped of who is this kind of ideally for? Like, what would be some
Yeah.
characteristics and qualities of a ministry that would that would that would utilize what we're going to talk about today, and then maybe like we can briefly talk about maybe some other resources if they're not quite there yet.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think before I jump into that one, just want to add on what you're saying, Andy, that I think really we are in a incredibly strategic time to step back from the day-to-day of ministry and work on those foundational pieces. Because you think about with the shift impact of COVID-19 and stuff moving, essentially, if you had a ministry, maybe you had like picture your ministry as a house, what's happened is a flood came and knocked, 3/4 of that house away, depending on what the structure of your ministry is. So a bunch of that foundation is now being exposed. So real great opportune time, maybe not in a fun way, but a really strategic moment to work on that foundation. So when we think about who we're working with, ministries, churches, organizations, where we get to work with them and help them lay the foundation for a disciple making ministry, with whether that's with college students or young adults or a mix of both. Usually what that looks like, the people we're thinking about and targeting in that are, it might be a church that has some young adults there. Maybe they even have a ministry that's going on. Or maybe they have not quite fully started a ministry. A lot of the times what happens is there's some sort of event going on, some sort of gathering of young adults or a gathering of college students. They might even have someone on staff who is officially a college young adult pastor, or maybe it's a youth pastor who is also overseeing college students, young adults. Or we've worked with churches that have worship pastors who are doing that, or executive pastors, or anyone who has a heart for that that will pick that up. And what we see happening a lot of times is they'll have a ministry, but it doesn't really have a foundation. It was an idea of, hey, let's start something. We want to reach these people. We'll start a Thursday night gathering. We'll start a Sunday morning Bible study for young adults, or a community group that's specifically targeted towards young adults. But the groundwork has not necessarily been laid when you come in and actually look at what's going on behind the scenes. So that's what we get to come in and do, whether it's where they're starting from ground zero, which Andy, I think you'll probably talk a little bit more about
Yeah.
that, some of the stuff that we do with people who are just starting a ministry. But most of our time here, we'll be talking about what does it look like to lay a foundation. And I think that's a really important thing to say. Just because you have a ministry going on, just because you have a house built, does not necessarily mean that there's a solid foundation there that's going to last long term. And here's the reality with college and young adult ministry is there's a lot of turnover. Whereas
Yeah.
some family and adult ministry stuff, you generally have a little bit more longevity with the people involved. College and young adults, 3 years, 4 years tops, and depending on your context, if you're in a smaller city where there's a community college, it might be 1 or 2 years is your turnover rate, and that usually also applies to the people leading the ministry.
Yeah.
So if the foundation is not there, it's probably not going to last.
Yeah, which and it's interesting because I think what we need to even kind of mention is, man, we're working with some churches right now that might look from the outside and think that they're pretty successful. I mean, ministries with over 100 people, right? But as we begin to kind of peel back the layers, these are some of the issues that they're dealing with. And so this isn't like you'd be surprised of how many, what I would say is probably 75% of the churches and leaders we talk to, this is what they need to work on. Now, what I would say is there's probably another 10 to 15% that would be before this, which would be stage 0. And you briefly alluded to that. And that's another conversation we can have at some other point about a church or leader that says, hey, I want to start something. What do I do? This is more what we're going to be talking about today is really about, hey, I have something going on. How do I increase effectiveness, continue to strengthen the foundation, continue to help move forward? So we wanted to kind of set the parameters of the type of ministry that we're really talking about today.
And one other call out there too, like you said, Andy, just because we said, just because something's going on doesn't mean it has a solid foundation. Just because it's big doesn't mean has a solid foundation. Another thing is just because it's been around for a long time does not mean it's a solid foundation. We're also working with ministries that have been around 10, 15 years. And when you come in and just saying, when we're saying that it doesn't have a solid foundation does not mean that it's a bad ministry. It does not mean that they're not. A lot of these ministries are doing amazing work impacting people, but coming in and saying, hey, let's put in some of those foundational disciple making things, help you develop a team. Those things are going to exponentially increase the impact that ministry is going to be able to have.
Yeah, exactly. So there's really for us in stage 1 is 3 things we want to go over. Number 1 is we're going to talk about building a team and strengthening your team. Number 2, a strategy and culture of disciple making. And number 3 is understanding your context. So why don't you start, Ben, maybe with the team one and just say, what are some things? So as a leader's listening to this right now, how do they begin to leverage the extra time that they have to build and strengthen their team?
Yeah. And I do think this is a great time to do that because the pressure, I feel this as a ministry leader, and we've talked with plenty of people around the country who are feeling the same thing in the last few weeks. The pressure is to do ministry in the same way that you've done it, right? If you're measuring your success by the number of people attending your weekly event, which is the default mode, and it's a valid measure to measure, but if you're measuring, that's your primary measure of success, then the pressure in this time is to keep it at that level numbers wise. When in reality, I think we're in a very opportune moment to say, hey, how can I double down on the people who are committed to the ministry or people who are on my team, whether they're volunteer or staff. So I think 1 or 2 things that I would say about starting a core team or developing a core team of people. One is, I mean, if you don't have a team of people, you got to start there. It's so easy, especially with the young adult college age ministry, to, like, if you are a person who's professionally leading, if you're on staff at a church or with a organization, you can have a lot of people who are volunteering and doing stuff, playing on a worship team, setting up and tearing down, and that does not mean that they're on the core team helping lead the ministry. Just because they're doing stuff to make the ministry function does not mean they're the core team. You have a core team if you have people you can say, I know if I'm gone, they're going to step up and keep this thing going. They bear the weight of the responsibility of that ministry. And I think one of the most essential things you can do. And if you don't have a team, now is a great time, because stuff is so dispersed and there's so much innovation needing to happen, that now is an amazing opportunity to say, hey guys, we need more people to take ownership of this ministry. I can't, be calling all the people who are involved. We got 200 people in this ministry. I can't call each of them and disciple each of them in the way that we could when we were face to face. So cast the two things for developing team. One is cast the vision, because if they don't understand the vision and what the heart is behind the ministry, they're never going to own the team. Two is make specific asks. That's one thing that we really encourage the people that we're working with, is saying, hey, if you have not sat down with a person and said, hey, will you be on my team here to help this ministry happen, and define exactly what's expected of them. I think those are two essential things. If they don't understand the vision, and if they don't know their role and what's expected of them, that's a recipe for messiness.
Yeah, here I want to loop back around on something you said, because I think it's really important. And this is where even a lot of the leaders that we work with, it's not that they don't have other leaders working with them. It's that there's no leaders that it's the difference between a leader who's carrying the responsibility of a part of a ministry versus the whole of the ministry. And where we want to help people get to is, who are the 2 or 3 or 4 other guys and gals with you who are shouldering the entire weight of the ministry with you. They're not just thinking about the worship team or the small groups or the events, but they're thinking about the long-term overall impact of the ministry moving forward. So that's really good. So that's number one, right? Is building, developing your team right now. Number two, and I think this is critical, and a lot of people are trying to figure this out, is a strategy and a culture of disciple making. I would say this is one of the things that is the pressure point for a lot of churches right now, is how are they going to disciple their college students and young adults, right? Is it Zoom? Is it phone calls? Is it how exactly are we going to do these things? One of the things that we see is we want to try to help leaders understand this idea of building a culture of disciple making, where disciple making becomes really the center and the lens at which they look through everything. So if it's an event, they're thinking about it in terms of disciple making. If it's their midweek gathering, they're thinking about it in terms of disciple making. If it's their leadership team, that they're thinking about it in terms of disciple making. And then what you need to think about is, what does it look like? And it's amazing how many people that we work with, Ben, and I'd love to hear you kind of comment on this, of how many people that we work with that the view of a biblical definition of a disciple is so scattered, right? It's so many like, yeah, I think it's this, and maybe it's this. And why don't you maybe just talk to you about like the importance of having a clear kind of target of what a disciple looks like, that we're helping our ministry move people towards.
Yeah, I think that's so essential. To one of the exercises we'll have ministries we're working with do is sit down and actually create a definition of what are some of the characteristics of a mature disciple, because a lot of times we haven't taken the work to do that. We kind of just make some general assumptions around what does it look like to be a good follower of Jesus or a good Christian, and we just grab stuff from the Christian culture or from whatever recent like Francis Chan book that came out, and say, okay, these are the things, rather than taking the time to sit down and think through, look through scripture and say, what are the things that are those essentials? And tied in with that, right, the disciple making question ultimately is a heart question. And if you want to be making disciples, you have to be dealing with heart level issues. You can't be dealing solely with actions. Actions are signs pointing you to what's going on in the heart. And like Jesus says to his disciples, the issue isn't, you can wash the outside of the cup all you want. If you don't clean the inside of the cup, it's stupid to drink out of it. And the point in disciple making is saying, hey, are we helping people deal with those heart issues? And the reality is, right, a scenario like we're in right now with the pandemic going on is that sloshes a lot of those heart issues out into the open,
Yes.
that were not there, where people who are able to keep their anxiety and fear and lack of trust in God hidden in normal times, now that's out in the open, because pressures on, or people who are hiding from dealing with their own issues by being super extroverted and going into all the ministry events, now can't do that. So all that to say, this is a great moment to have some of those disciple making conversations with
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. And it's interesting a lot of times, and we talk with leaders about this, is a lot of times what we're trying to do is we try to replicate the form of disciple making. But what we're not helping our people understand is the heart of disciple making. Like,
Yeah.
really what Jesus was trying, the DNA that Jesus was trying to transmit to his disciples is different than, hey, now this leader can answer question or ask questions, right? Or they can now lead a group and go through this curriculum. Really what we see in a disciple is somebody who has the ability, the capacity to turn around and to make a disciple and to transmit the heart of Jesus, not just a form sometimes that we get so closely tied to. So that's good.
Yeah.
So number one, we talk about team. Number two, we talk about building a strategy and a culture of disciple making. Number three, and this is, you may think that this is a kind of an odd one, but it's context. And for us, this is actually really important because of some of the things that we do in the future. Maybe I'll touch on those here in a minute or two. But what do you mean? What do we mean by context, Ben, of
Mhm.
how somebody can maybe understand their context a little bit more to develop that in this time as part of the foundation?
Yeah. So we leveraged some stuff from great organization called Auxano. When we think about context, asking what is the local predicament? What problems are present in your context, in your city, or if you're on your campus, what are some of the big issues that people are dealing with around you? And that's one piece. Another piece is, how has God uniquely gifted your team, and the people in your ministry? How has God strategically placed you to have an impact? And then my mind just went blank on
Oh,
the third
and
one.
then place is the
Yeah.
local predicament is the problems, and then place is the unique challenges of where you're at, like
Yeah.
the context where you're at.
Yeah, and each of those things, right? The reality is that a lot of the times we'll just come in and we'll copy and paste ministry. We'll see something that succeeded elsewhere, and then we'll say, okay, great, let's do that here. Or we did, we had over here, they had a young adult Sunday school that grew by a bunch. Let's do a young adult Sunday school. Over here, they had a midweek worship gathering that blew up, and a bunch of people had great stories of how they were impacted by that. So let's do that. And when reality, what happens generally when we do that, is, like Andy said, we're fighting for a form rather than actually addressing those heart issues. And it causes us oftentimes to launch too soon, is one thing that I think happens in a lot of ministries. We started out with talking about a core team, when I think really the thing that comes first is that disciple making piece. If you as a leader start making disciples, you're going to develop a core team. And out of that naturally is going to come an understanding of the context. So a lot of the times when we're working with ministries, they launched first and then are trying to back build all that stuff.
Yeah.
So we get to come in and say, hey, let's take a step back and think about what's the context. What are the unique needs that your campus has? What are unique opportunities? What are unique gifts that God has placed in your team? And one of the assumptions behind that is that God is intentional in everything he does. Like Acts 17, I know is a passage, Andy, that I've heard you preach on multiple times. And it's such a key one, where Paul says, and he's speaking to non-believers in the Areopagus, saying that God has allotted the times and places that you're going to live so that you might seek him. And he's not far from you. I think the application for that, if you are a believer, is that if God's found you and you've discovered him, God has a lot of the time and place that you are now with intentionality, so that you can point other people to where he is. So God's intentional in everything that he does, and we're assuming that that's true. I think it's biblical, and that's key. So we need to pay attention to the factors that are around us.
Yeah. And it's interesting, just kind of commenting on and probably to give you an idea of what we do next with churches is really about vision and strategy. And it's interesting how many times, and Ben, you know this, how many times churches come to us and that's the thing that they want to figure
Mhm.
out. Like, give me a vision and strategy for my college or young adult ministry. Like, that's what I need help developing. When what we try to do is help them kind of peel back and say, well, if you don't have a core team that's going to be a part of the discussion of that vision and strategy, if disciple making isn't going to be at the center of that vision and strategy, and if you don't understand your context, your people, place, your passion in a unique way, what happens is the vision and strategy is very plain. It doesn't have the impact that it has because of those foundational things that you can build of a core team, a disciple making strategy and culture, and then understanding your context in a unique way gives that vision and strategy power. It gives
Mhm.
it strength. It gives it impact. And so often what we have is we have leaders. We love vision and strategy in the church, right? We want to jump to that so quickly when I think sometimes what we want to do is kind of drill down under some of those things before vision and strategy to give that vision and strategy a certain power and strength to it.
Yeah. And I mean, on that too, I think I know for Andy, you and I and plenty of the leaders we work with, their vision and strategy is a thing that we love. But there are also people who get into ministry because they love people, because they care about the
Mhm.
pastoral side of things. They want to bless people and encourage people and sit down one-on-one and help them deal with issues. And vision and strategy feels overwhelming or crazy or like I can't think about that. And when you actually take time to step back and ask those questions about context, and you're doing it with a team of people that has a variety of giftings, um, if you're one of those people who hear vision and strategy and say no thanks, I just want to do what God's leading me to do in the moment and minister to the people that are in front of me, that vision and strategy is actually going to become very energizing and exciting for you. I
Yeah.
know we've seen that happen locally in our team. There's like 2 or 3 of us on our team that like and get excited about the vision and strategy, and then 2 or 3 that are kind of like, this is overwhelming. I don't want to think about 5 years from now and what's going to happen. But when we're able to say, hey, look, these are the people and this is the context, these are the giftings, this is the way this is going to roll out in day-to-day discipleship, people who are less apt to think that way can at the very least see the value of it and in some cases get excited and energized about it where they wouldn't otherwise.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good. So to kind of finish it off here, and we're going to go, if anybody's got any questions, you can go ahead and post them to the comments. We got a few people on watching, and so if you got a question about something specifically, we'll give you maybe a minute or so to get those rolling in. We're lagging a little bit behind normally on a stream like this. So the encouragement is for you. One is this is a tremendous opportunity right now that you have to work on your ministry. As you begin to kind of figure out some of the logistical things that you're trying to figure out. Okay, how are we going to stay connected to students? How are we going to organize community? How are we going to aspects of fun? How do I facilitate spiritual growth? As you begin to get answered, then you're going to have an opportunity to really work on your ministry, and we want to encourage you to do that. So leverage really this time. The second thing is if you're struggling, right, and you're trying to figure out some of these things, the offers, we'd always would love to jump on a call with you. And it takes about 45 minutes, an hour or so. We'll just ask you some different questions to kind of help diagnose where you're at, to kind of hear some of the problems, and then just give you some simple solutions. Hey, here's what you should think about. Here's what you should focus on. Here's what you can do in order to take some steps forward. And we love to do that all the time. Every week we get a chance to do that with leaders, and so that's an open offer to anybody who is either watching this live or at some point down the road is watching this. We'd love to be able to do that with you. So I'll just give another minute if there's any questions or not. Anything else you want to comment, Ben, before while
Yeah,
people are maybe putting in some questions?
I think one really helpful conversation we've had a couple times in different contexts with ministry leaders, and I've had locally with the team here. For me, and I don't know if everyone's wired this way, but for me, I've definitely felt like a more pressure to be productive, because a lot of the stuff that filled my time about 2 weeks ago when stuff started shutting down, locking down, kind of got knocked off my plate. There's plenty, but it doesn't feel like there's less to do, because if you're in the leadership role in a ministry world, the list of potential things to do is endless. So there's kind of this pressure to continue at the same level of productivity that I was at, or at least that I felt like I was at. And sometimes that's stepping back and working on a ministry or taking time to think deeply about things feels less productive. But right, God's built into our world, even from the very moment of creation, rhythms of work and rest.
Right.
And if we don't have that built in, we're going to burn out eventually. And I think that's true equally in the sense of like our physical bodies as well as in leadership in ministry. So if you're working in your ministry, you need to take time to step back, catch your breath, and rest in the ministry, and rest and that, for me at least, sometimes looks like it's restful for me to do this, to sit back and kind of dream and think and imagine.
Yeah.
So I think this is a strategic time. Like, don't be afraid if your ministry, if you're like struggling like crazy to get this thing moved online, or you feel like it's not working, or there's not people showing up, like, don't be afraid to press pause on the ministry for a couple weeks. Like, you can do that, and it's okay. That doesn't mean you totally disconnect from the people in the ministry, but don't be afraid to say, hey guys, next 3 weeks, we're not going to have an official meeting. If you need something, call me, or whatever that might look like. I just think that's something that I think is important for us to have permission to do.
Cool. That's good. Well, I don't think there's any questions. If you're watching the replay at this, you can just post in the comments below, and Ben or myself will follow up with you and answer any questions that you might have. So encouragement, keep after it, man. We're so excited about what's happening in a lot of your ministries and churches, and we're cheering you on. We're praying for you. We want to support you. So man, just important days ahead, important days for the work that we're doing. So thanks for joining us. Hopefully at some point, Ben and I maybe hop on and do another couple things, but yeah, so I think that's it for today. We will talk to you later.